The morning Daniel Whitmore came to take the house, Claire learned that some people do not need to raise their voice to destroy you. They simply arrive with paperwork, a polished smile, and the kind of confidence only a liar can wear comfortably. It was 7:12 on a Monday in late October, and rain tapped against the red front door like nervous fingers. Claire had been awake since 5, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee gone cold between her hands, listening to the old pipes hum inside the walls. The house smelled faintly of lemon soap, wet leaves, and the cinnamon candle she had lit the night before because she still believed, foolishly perhaps, that small rituals could hold a life together. Then came the knock. 3 firm strikes. Not angry, not impatient. Official. She knew before she opened the door that nothing good stood on the other side. A county deputy waited on the porch in a dark rain jacket, his expression carefully neutral, the way people look when they have been trained not to absorb other people's pain. Behind him, under a black umbrella, stood Daniel in a charcoal overcoat that probably cost more than Claire's monthly grocery budget. Beside him was Vanessa Cole, his new wife, slim, blonde, dry beneath the umbrella, holding a white paper cup from a coffee shop as if this were an errand between Pilates and brunch. Daniel did not look at the house first. He looked at Claire. That was worse. Claire, he said, with the soft disappointment of a man pretending this had been forced upon him. I wish you hadn't made it come to this. The deputy cleared his throat and handed her the notice. The paper was warm from his gloved hand, but the words on it felt cold enough to numb her fingers. Order to vacate. 48 hours. Unauthorized occupancy. Property of Whitmore Family Trust. For a moment, the lines blurred. Not because she cried. She refused to give Daniel that. It was because the room behind her seemed to tilt, the hallway stretching backward through 17 years of memory. The staircase where she had sat waiting for Daniel to come home from business dinners that lasted until dawn. The living room where Evelyn Whitmore, Daniel's mother, had spent her final winter wrapped in quilts, calling Claire the daughter she should have had. The dining room table Claire had refinished by hand because Daniel said hiring someone for little things was wasteful, even while he spent thousands flying to conferences he never explained. And the red door. That ridiculous red door. She had painted it herself one spring afternoon when Evelyn was still strong enough to sit on the porch and supervise with a glass of iced tea. A happy house needs a door that knows how to welcome people home, Evelyn had said. Claire had laughed then. She did not laugh now. Daniel stepped closer, careful not to let the rain touch his shoes. You knew the divorce settlement was final. You knew this house was never yours. Vanessa gave a small, sympathetic smile that had no sympathy in it. Some women just don't know when they've overstayed their welcome. Claire looked at her, then at Daniel, and something inside her went strangely quiet. Not peaceful, not calm, quieter than that. The kind of quiet that comes when the worst thing finally happens and your body realizes it has survived the sound. Behind Daniel, a neighbor's curtain shifted. Across the street, Mr. Keller stood half-hidden in his garage, pretending to sort recycling while watching every second. Claire could feel the neighborhood collecting the scene, storing it for whispers. Poor Claire, still living in Daniel's house. Couldn't move on. Had to be removed. Human beings like tragedies best when they could watch from a dry porch. She folded the notice once, then again, making the crease sharp with her thumbnail. I'll pack, she said. Daniel's face flickered. He had expected pleading. Maybe anger. Maybe the old Claire, the one who apologized when he was cruel because she had been trained to believe peace was her responsibility. But that woman had been worn down years ago, not buried, just hidden under the dust of surviving him. That would be best, he said. Vanessa shifted past him, eyes moving over the entryway, already arranging furniture in her mind. Claire saw her gaze land on the brass hook near the door, where Evelyn's old gardening hat still hung. That can go, Vanessa murmured. Claire's hand tightened around the notice. The deputy looked away. Even he seemed to understand that a hat could be more than a hat when it belonged to the only person in that family who had ever treated Claire like she mattered. No, Claire said quietly. She stepped inside, took the hat from the hook, and placed it in the first cardboard box she could find. Then she added the framed photograph from the hallway table, the one of Evelyn standing beside the red door, one hand on Claire's shoulder, both of them smiling into a summer sun Daniel had not been there to see. By noon, Claire had packed her life into 6 boxes in the back seat of a 10-year-old Subaru with a cracked taillight. Daniel remained on the porch, making calls, speaking in low tones about timelines and contractors and market value. Vanessa walked through the rooms taking pictures on her phone. Claire did not stop her. She carried the last box out herself, rain soaking through her sweater, her hair sticking to her cheek. At the threshold, she turned once. The house seemed to hold its breath. Then the red door closed behind her with a soft, final click. Claire did not drive away immediately. She sat behind the wheel with both hands on the steering wheel, watching the red door through a windshield blurred by rain. The house looked smaller from the street, almost ordinary, as if it had not held the best and worst years of her adult life inside its walls. Daniel stood on the porch, one hand in his coat pocket, the other pressed to his phone. Vanessa had already disappeared inside, swallowed by rooms Claire had dusted, painted, repaired, and loved long after love had stopped being returned to her. The Subaru smelled of cardboard, damp wool, and the faint lavender sachets Evelyn used to tuck into linen closets. In the passenger seat, the framed photograph of Evelyn leaned against a box-labeled kitchen, though half the things inside had nothing to do with a kitchen at all. That was how a life ended sometimes, not with clean categories, but with whatever could be grabbed before strangers decided your memories were clutter. Claire reached over and touched the corner of the frame. Evelyn Whitmore smiled up from behind the glass, white-haired and bright-eyed, standing beside the red door on a May afternoon almost 9 years earlier. Claire remembered the day with painful clarity. Daniel had been in Boston for what he called a strategic retreat, though later Claire would learn it had also involved a hotel suite and several lies told with impressive efficiency. Evelyn had been recovering from her second round of treatment then, thin but stubborn, wrapped in a pale blue cardigan despite the 72-degree weather. She had insisted the door needed color. Daniel preferred black, of course. Daniel liked everything clean, expensive, and emotionally unavailable. Black cars, black suits, black coffee, black granite countertops that showed every fingerprint as if the house itself were keeping evidence. Evelyn had rolled her eyes when Claire said Daniel would complain. Let him complain, she had said from the porch chair, lifting her iced tea with theatrical authority. My son has mistaken taste for character his entire life. Claire had laughed so hard she nearly dropped the paintbrush. It was the first time anyone in Daniel's family had admitted what Claire had been too loyal, too young, and too exhausted to say out loud. That afternoon, they painted the door a deep, warm red, the color of cranberries, brick sidewalks, and old barns in New England towns. Evelyn said a red door meant welcome in some places, protection in others, and mortgage anxiety in Daniel's case. When Daniel came home 2 days later, he stood in the driveway staring at it like Claire had painted a confession across the front of the house. It is dramatic, he said. Evelyn, sitting by the window with a blanket over her knees, called back, So are you, darling, but we kept you. For years after that, the red door became Claire's private proof that the house had once belonged to something warmer than Daniel's ambition. When Evelyn's illness worsened, Claire moved her work laptop into the guest room and learned the quiet mathematics of care. Medication every 4 hours, broth when solid food was impossible, fresh sheets at 2 in the morning, insurance forms stacked in neat piles, and Daniel's excuses arriving by text. Board dinner. Investor call. Flight delayed. He sent flowers when he remembered. Claire brought Evelyn water before she asked. In those final months, Evelyn told stories Daniel never had. How he had cried before his first day of school, how he hated losing at Monopoly, how his father had taught him that money was not just power, but proof. That was our mistake, Evelyn whispered one winter night, her hand fragile in Claire's. We taught him to win before we taught him to love. Claire had not known what to say, so she had held her hand and watched snow gather on the red door outside, bright even under the porch light. Now, years later, Daniel had stood under that same porch and called her an unauthorized occupant. The absurdity of it was almost elegant, in the way only human cruelty can be elegant when dressed in legal language. Claire started the car, but before she pulled away, she looked once more at the house. Vanessa appeared at the front window, phone raised, already documenting her arrival. Claire felt something twist in her chest, sharp but not fatal. She had thought leaving Daniel had been the end of being erased. She had been wrong. This was erasure with county letterhead. She drove 6 miles through the rain to Rachel Porter's townhouse on the edge of town, a narrow place with yellow siding, a sagging porch, and a guest room that smelled like laundry detergent and old paperbacks. Rachel opened the door before Claire could knock twice. She did not ask what happened. She saw the boxes, the soaked sweater, the folded notice in Claire's hand, and simply pulled her inside. That night, after Rachel made grilled cheese sandwiches Claire barely touched, Claire sat cross-legged on the guest room floor, sorting through the box that held Evelyn's photograph. The frame had cracked during the move. A thin line ran across the glass, cutting through the red door in the background. Claire turned it over carefully to remove the backing, intending to save the picture before the glass damaged it further. That was when she noticed the envelope taped behind the cardboard insert. It was cream-colored, old, and sealed. Her name was written across the front in Evelyn's careful hand. For Claire, when they try to take what I gave you. For several seconds, Claire did not move. The guest room around her seemed to fall away, leaving only the envelope in her hands and the steady sound of rain ticking against Rachel's window. Evelyn's handwriting was unmistakable, delicate but firm, each letter slightly tilted to the right, as if even her words had somewhere important to go. Claire ran her thumb over her own name. The paper was old, softened at the corners, but the seal had never been broken. A strange chill moved through her, not fear exactly, but the feeling of standing at the edge of a room she had not known existed in her own life. Rachel sat on the bed behind her, folding one of Claire's sweaters with the tense silence of someone trying very hard not to interfere. "What is it?" she asked gently. Claire swallowed. Her throat felt dry, though she had been soaked through less than an hour earlier. "It is from Evelyn." Rachel stopped folding. The name changed the air between them. Everyone who had known Claire during the divorce knew about Evelyn, not because Claire spoke of her often, but because grief has a way of leaving fingerprints on ordinary conversations. Evelyn had been the one person in the Whitmore family who had looked at Claire and seen a human being instead of an accessory Daniel had outgrown. Claire slid one finger beneath the flap and opened the envelope carefully, afraid of tearing even the smallest part of it. Inside were 3 things: a handwritten letter, a folded photocopy of a legal document, and a small brass key taped to a square of stationery. The key was not for the front door. Claire recognized it immediately. It belonged to the locked drawer in Evelyn's old writing desk, the mahogany one Daniel had moved to the study after her death and later dismissed as sentimental junk. Claire had asked once what was inside. Daniel had said old recipes and church programs, nothing worth keeping. Naturally, in the grand tradition of men who say something is nothing, it appeared to be something. Claire unfolded the letter first. "My dear Claire," it began, and those 3 words struck her harder than the eviction notice had. Not because they were dramatic, because they were kind. Daniel had always used kindness like a coin, something to spend when he wanted obedience. Evelyn had given it away like warmth. Claire read slowly, her eyes catching on phrases that seemed to rise from the page with the patience of someone who had waited years to be heard. Evelyn wrote that she had watched Claire hold the family together while Daniel chased applause. She wrote that the house had stopped being a Whitmore house the day Claire made it a home. She wrote that gratitude was useless unless it was brave enough to become action. Rachel moved from the bed to the floor beside her, close enough to offer comfort, far enough not to steal the moment. Claire reached the final lines and felt her breath leave her body. "If Daniel ever forgets what you gave to this family, let the records remind him. What I placed in your name, I placed there with a clear mind and a full heart. Do not let them shame you out of what is yours." Claire looked at the photocopy next. The heading was formal, dense, almost hostile in the way legal language can make even mercy sound like a tax audit. Warranty deed. Transfer of ownership. Address of the red-doored house on Hawthorne Lane. Grantor, Evelyn Margaret Whitmore. Grantee, Claire and Whitmore. The date was 5 years before the divorce, barely 2 months before Evelyn passed away. Claire read it once, then again, but the words did not become less impossible. "Rachel," she whispered, "this says she gave me the house." Rachel took the paper with both hands, her face tightening as she scanned it. "This is a copy," she said. "But if there is an original somewhere, or if it was recorded with the county, Daniel has a very serious problem." Claire almost laughed, but it came out as a broken breath. The idea of Daniel having a problem felt too large to trust. Daniel, who always seemed to own the room, the conversation, the bank account, the version of events everyone believed. Daniel, who had stood under an umbrella that morning and watched her carry boxes through the rain. Daniel, who had called her an unauthorized occupant in a home his mother may have legally given to her. Claire picked up the brass key. It was cold and small against her palm, absurdly ordinary for something that might unlock the truth. The writing desk was still in the study. Vanessa was probably walking past it that very moment, photographing curtain rods and crown molding, unaware that the house she was measuring with her eyes had already begun to move out from under her. Rachel stood abruptly, practical fury sharpening her voice. "We are calling a lawyer." Claire stared down at Evelyn's letter, at the careful loops of ink left by a woman who had seen more than she had said. Outside, the rain softened. For the first time all day, Claire noticed the quiet not as emptiness, but as a door opening somewhere in the dark. By 8 the next morning, Claire was sitting in the back corner of a small law office above a bakery on Main Street, watching steam rise from a paper cup of coffee she had not touched. The office belonged to Margaret Hayes, a woman Rachel described as the kind of attorney who makes arrogant men suddenly remember their manners. Claire had expected glass walls, polished marble, maybe a receptionist with a headset and a smile sharp enough to cut fruit. Instead, Margaret's office smelled like old files, black coffee, and cinnamon rolls drifting up through the floorboards. The walls were lined with framed court certificates, faded newspaper clippings, and shelves packed so tightly with legal books that the room seemed held together by precedent and dust. Margaret Hayes was in her late 50s, with silver hair cut just below her jaw and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She wore a navy blazer, no-nonsense shoes, and the weary expression of someone who had spent 3 decades watching people discover that love and paperwork should never be kept in separate drawers. She read Evelyn's letter first. Then she read the photocopy of the deed. Then she read both again, slower, while Claire sat with her hands folded so tightly her knuckles ached. Rachel stood near the window, arms crossed, staring down at the bakery awning as if Daniel might crawl out from under it with another legal notice. Margaret finally set the papers on her desk and looked at Claire over the top of her glasses. "I am going to say this carefully," she said. "This is not nothing." Claire let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. "But it is only a copy. A copy can point us toward the original." Margaret tapped the deed with one finger. "The question is whether Evelyn recorded the transfer with the county. If she did, then your ex-husband either did not know, which makes him careless, or he did know, which makes him something much more interesting." Rachel gave a short laugh, without humor. "Interesting is generous." Margaret's mouth twitched. "I bill by the hour. I use polite words until court gives me permission not to." Claire should have smiled, but her body had not caught up with hope yet. Hope felt dangerous. Hope had once sounded like Daniel promising that next year would be easier, that the late nights were temporary, that the business needed him, that she was imagining the distance between them. Hope had been expensive. It had cost her years. What if he says Evelyn was confused? Claire asked. She was sick. Daniel used to say she had good days and bad days. Margaret leaned back. Did she have a diagnosis affecting her capacity? No. She was physically ill, not mentally impaired. She handled her own bills until the final month. Good. Did anyone witness her signing documents? I do not know. Then we find out. Margaret opened a yellow legal pad and began writing. Her handwriting was brisk, angled, impatient with nonsense. County recorder. Probate file. Notary records. Mortgage statements. Property tax history. Bank records if we can get them. And that locked desk drawer. Claire touched the brass key inside her coat pocket. It had felt heavy all morning, absurd for something so small. The desk is still in the house. Then we need lawful access, not a dramatic midnight adventure like people with no understanding of evidence chain of custody. Rachel sighed. There goes my plan. Your plan was terrible, Margaret said, without looking up. Most satisfying plans are. For the first time since the deputy knocked on the red door, Claire almost laughed. It startled her, that tiny sound rising in her chest like a match struck in a dark room. Margaret noticed, but did not soften too much. Claire appreciated that. Pity would have broken her. Strategy steadied her. The attorney turned to her computer, logged into the county property records database, and typed in the address on Hawthorne Lane. Each click sounded too loud. Claire watched the screen, afraid to blink, afraid the truth might disappear if she looked away. The page loaded slowly, because apparently even justice had to buffer like a cheap hotel Wi-Fi connection. Parcel number. Assessed value. Tax history. Prior transfers. Margaret leaned closer. Rachel moved behind Claire's chair. Claire felt her pulse in her throat. Then Margaret stopped scrolling. Her face changed, not dramatically, but enough. The professional stillness sharpened into focus. There it is, she said quietly. Claire gripped the edge of the chair. What? Margaret turned the monitor slightly, so Claire could see. The words were plain, black, and almost unbearably calm. Owner of record, Claire and Whitmore. Recorded date, March 18, 2018. For a moment, Claire heard nothing. Not the bakery downstairs, not the traffic outside, not Rachel whispering her name. The whole world narrowed to those 4 words. Owner of record. Her name had been there all along, sitting in a county database while Daniel stood on her porch and told her she belonged nowhere. Margaret did not let anyone celebrate. The moment Claire's name appeared on the screen, Rachel made a sound halfway between a gasp and a victory cry, but Margaret lifted one hand, calm and sharp as a stop sign. Not yet, she said. A record is powerful, but people like Daniel do not step aside because truth clears its throat. They step aside when truth brings receipts, certified copies, and a judge who has had enough coffee. Claire stared at the monitor until the letters began to blur. Owner of record. For simple words, and still her body did not know what to do with them. Her mind understood them. Her heart stood far behind, arms crossed, refusing to trust another beautiful thing just because it had appeared on a screen. Daniel had taught her that beautiful things could be staged. Promises could be staged. Apologies could be staged. Even love, if performed by a skilled enough man, could look convincing under warm lighting. Margaret printed the county record, then requested a certified copy through the recorder's office portal. She moved with brisk precision, clicking through forms, entering parcel numbers, making notes on her yellow pad. We also need the mortgage history, she said. Did you contribute to payments? Claire gave a small, humorless laugh. I paid whatever Daniel said needed paying. Sometimes directly, sometimes through our joint account. For years. Bank statements. Some. Not all. Find everything. Mortgage payments, property taxes, repairs, insurance, contractor invoices. If you bought a $12 can of red paint for that front door, I want the receipt if you still have it. Rachel leaned forward. You are serious about the paint? Margaret looked at her over the glasses. I am serious about patterns. Courts appreciate patterns. One document tells a fact. 100 little documents tell a story. Claire understood then that Margaret was not only building a legal argument. She was building a map of all the invisible labor Daniel had counted on no one noticing. The checks Claire had written. The appointments she had managed. The shingles she had replaced after a storm while Daniel was in Palm Beach with clients. The winter heating bill she paid from her freelance design income because Daniel said cash flow was tight that quarter, only for him to come home the next week with a new watch and an explanation so smooth it practically wore a tie. Margaret turned back to the property record. There is another issue. Claire's stomach tightened because apparently hope came with hidden fees. The eviction filing lists the Whitmore Family Trust as the owner. That means someone submitted paperwork claiming ownership that conflicts with the county record. Daniel, Rachel said. Margaret nodded once. Likely Daniel, or an attorney acting on information Daniel provided. Either way, we need to respond fast. The court granted the order based on what it was shown. Now we show it. What was left out? The phrase settled over Claire like cold water. What was left out? That had been the story of her marriage. Daniel left out the late-night calls. He left out the credit card charges. He left out the way Evelyn cried when he missed her final birthday dinner. He left out Claire's name whenever he spoke about the life they built. As if homes cleaned themselves, meals appeared from air, aging mothers cared for their own failing bodies, and wives existed only in the margins unless blame needed somewhere to land. Margaret picked up the brass key from the desk where Claire had placed it. About the locked drawer. We do not enter that house without legal protection. I will file an emergency motion this afternoon to stay the eviction order and request supervised access to retrieve personal property and potential estate documents belonging to or intended for you. Rachel frowned. Will that take long? Long is relative. In the legal system, Fast means everyone is mildly annoyed instead of asleep. She stood and reached for a gray suit jacket hanging behind her chair. But I know the clerk. I know the courtroom. And I know Judge Eleanor Brooks does not enjoy being used as a tool in someone's domestic revenge campaign. Claire finally looked away from the screen. Domestic revenge campaign, she repeated softly. Margaret's expression softened by one careful degree. That is what this looks like, Claire. Not a misunderstanding. Not a clean property dispute. A man used a court order to remove you from a home that public records say belongs to you. The room went quiet. Downstairs, the bakery bell chimed. Bright and ordinary, someone buying muffins while Claire's life rearranged itself above their heads. She pressed Evelyn's letter flat with both palms, as if anchoring herself to the only Whitmore who had ever told the truth without needing applause. By noon, Margaret had filed the emergency motion. By 3, Daniel's attorney had been notified. By 4, Daniel called Claire for the first time since the porch. His name glowed on her phone like a threat pretending to be a contact. Rachel reached for it, but Claire shook her head. She let it ring until it stopped. Then a message arrived. We need to talk before you embarrass yourself. Claire read it once, then handed the phone to Margaret. The attorney smiled without warmth. Excellent, she said. He is nervous. Daniel did not wait for Claire to answer. By the next morning, his attorney had filed a response so fast it felt less like legal strategy and more like panic wearing a tie. Margaret called Claire at 8:16 while she was standing in Rachel's kitchen, spreading peanut butter on toast she had no appetite for. He is claiming the deed was never properly disclosed during the divorce because it was invalid, Margaret said, her voice dry enough to sand furniture. He is also claiming Evelyn lacked capacity. The transfer was a clerical mistake, and you are attempting to exploit a grieving family. Claire closed her eyes. There it was. The old Daniel pattern, polished and predictable. When cornered, rewrite the room. When exposed, become the victim. When caught holding someone else's life in your hands, ask why they are making things uncomfortable. Rachel, still in pajama pants and a sweatshirt from a 5K she had absolutely walked, looked up from the stove. What did he say? Claire put the phone on speaker. Margaret repeated it. Rachel stared at the ceiling as if requesting patience from whatever tired department managed human stupidity. A clerical mistake recorded in the county database for years, Rachel said. Bold. Ridiculous, but bold. Margaret did not laugh. Not be simple. Margaret's tone sharpened. I did some digging. Public filings show Daniel's development company has 2 liens against it. There is also a pending contractor claim from a commercial renovation project in Stamford. Nothing criminal on its face, but he appears to need liquidity. Rachel turned off the burner. So he threw Claire out because he needed money. Claire looked down at the toast, the peanut butter uneven and torn where the knife had dragged too hard. Her stomach turned. During the divorce, Daniel had told everyone Claire wanted too much, that she was emotional, that she did not understand business realities. Now business reality had come dressed as an eviction notice. The hearing is scheduled for Friday at 10 in the morning, Margaret said. Judge Eleanor Brooks granted our emergency motion to stay the order until then. That means Daniel cannot remove, sell, or alter anything in the house before the hearing. Claire leaned against the counter. The room felt suddenly too bright. So I can go back? Not alone. The court granted supervised access this afternoon for personal property and the locked desk drawer. A deputy will meet us there at 2. I will be present. Daniel's attorney may attend. Daniel may also attend, because apparently suffering must come with an audience. Rachel mouthed, I am coming. Claire nodded before remembering Margaret could not see her. Rachel will be with me. Good, Margaret said. Bring the key, Lane. Claire sat in the passenger seat with the brass key in her palm, feeling each notch press into her skin. The neighborhood looked unchanged, which offended her more than it should have. Clients were not the same thing as correct clients. Vanessa remained near the staircase, arms folded, watching Claire with the tight patience of someone waiting for a sales associate to remove an inconvenience from a fitting room. Brooks. Pierce Caldwell adjusted his tie and looked at Daniel. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Silence from Daniel was rare enough that Claire should have enjoyed it more. Her hand trembled slightly as she took the brass key from her coat pocket. For a moment, she saw Evelyn's thin fingers pressing that same key into an envelope, perhaps knowing exactly what kind of son she had raised. perhaps hoping she was wrong. Claire knelt before the lower left drawer. The key slid in with a soft metallic click. The sound seemed impossibly loud. Behind her, Vanessa shifted. Daniel inhaled. Rachel stopped breathing altogether. Claire turned the key. The drawer opened smoothly, releasing the faint scent of cedar, paper, and time. Inside was not a pile of recipes or old church programs. There was a blue folder labeled Hawthorne Lane Transfer, a sealed envelope addressed to the county recorder's office, several mortgage statements, and a small black notebook bound with an elastic band. Margaret crouched beside Claire, her expression sharpening. Do not touch anything else yet. She took out her phone and photographed the drawer exactly as it was. Then, with the deputy watching, she lifted the blue folder and opened it on the desk. The first page was a certified copy of the warranty deed. The second was a notarization certificate. The third was a letter from Evelyn's physician dated 1 week before the signing, stating that she was alert, oriented, and fully capable of making financial and legal decisions. Daniel's face lost color so subtly that anyone who had not been married to him might have missed it. Claire did not. She had spent years studying the weather of his expressions, trying to predict storms before they reached her. Vanessa stepped closer. Daniel, she said, and for the first time since Claire had met her, there was no performance in her voice. Margaret turned another page. Mortgage payment summaries, property tax receipts, handwritten notes in Evelyn's careful script. Claire paid March insurance. Claire arranged roof repair. Claire stayed overnight again. Claire is the only one who remembers this as a home. The room went very still. Daniel reached for the folder, but Pierce Caldwell caught his sleeve before he could touch it. A tiny movement, almost polite, but it told Claire everything. Even Daniel's own attorney knew the ground had shifted. Claire looked at the notebook last. On the first page, Evelyn had written a single sentence. If my son tells the world this house is his, ask him why he never noticed it had already become hers. Margaret closed the blue folder with the careful restraint of a woman who knew victory was most dangerous when it arrived early. Everything in this drawer will be photographed, inventoried, and submitted to the court, she said. Her voice was level, but Claire heard the steel beneath it. Daniel heard it too. He had gone very still near the doorway, one hand resting against the frame, his face arranged into the blank expression he used when numbers moved against him. Vanessa looked from the folder to Daniel, then to the desk, as if the wood itself had betrayed her. You told me this was settled, she said. Daniel did not answer her. He was watching Margaret place the physician's letter into a clear evidence sleeve. This is private family material, he said finally. My mother kept notes on everything. It does not prove intent. Margaret looked up. The notarized deed proves intent. The recorded transfer proves execution. The physician's letter addresses capacity. The payment records establish context. Your mother was thorough. Claire thought of Evelyn sitting at this desk, writing in that slanted hand while Daniel dismissed her as sentimental, old-fashioned, difficult. Maybe Evelyn had been all those things. Maybe she had also been observant enough to understand that decency needed documentation when surrounded by people who treated memory like a negotiable asset. Pierce Caldwell cleared his throat, his briefcase now clutched against his side like a flotation device. Mr. Whitmore, I would advise that we preserve all materials exactly as found. Daniel turned on him. I know what preservation means. Then this should be an easy afternoon for everyone, Margaret said. Rachel stood behind Claire with her arms folded, her expression saying several things the legal system would probably prefer not to hear aloud. The deputy, who had perfected the art of looking at walls during domestic awkwardness, stepped closer only when Daniel moved toward the desk, not blocking him, not threatening him, simply existing in the path between entitlement and evidence. Daniel stopped. Claire realized then that she was not shaking anymore. The fear had not vanished, but it had changed shape. It was no longer a hand around her throat. It was a cold stone in her pocket, heavy but carryable. She looked at the desk, at the folder, at Evelyn's notebook, and then at Daniel. For years, she had waited for some grand confession from him, some scene where he admitted what he had taken, how he had twisted love into obedience, how he had let her become small because small women were easier to manage. But standing in that study, with the rain tapping against the windows and his own attorney afraid to meet his eyes, Claire understood something almost freeing. Daniel did not need to confess. The paper had done it for him. Margaret placed the documents into her leather case, each one logged on a form the deputy signed as a witness. Claire was allowed to take Evelyn's notebook, the sealed envelope intended for the county recorder's office, and the original brass key after copies were made. The desk itself stayed behind, silent and dignified under the window. Vanessa followed them into the hallway. "Claire," she said, and this time her voice was smaller, stripped of its porch-perfect cruelty. Claire turned. Vanessa looked younger without the sunglasses, less like a villain and more like a woman who had bought a life from a man who never owned what he was selling. "Did you know?" Vanessa asked. "Before yesterday, did you know any of this?" Claire could have said something sharp. Rachel certainly looked ready to enjoy that. But Claire was tired of sharpness. She had lived inside Daniel's edges too long. "No," she said. "I knew I loved this house. I knew I paid for pieces of it. I knew Evelyn trusted me. But no, I did not know she had protected me this way." Vanessa looked toward Daniel. He had already turned away, phone in hand again, retreating into the only church he had ever worshipped, control. The deputy escorted everyone outside. The air smelled of wet leaves and chimney smoke. Across the street, Mr. Keller stood by his mailbox, pretending with heroic incompetence to sort envelopes that had clearly already been sorted. Claire almost laughed. The neighborhood was watching again. This time, though, the story was not so simple. Daniel remained on the porch, his jaw tight, Vanessa a few steps behind him, and Claire stood on the walkway beside Margaret and Rachel with a leather case full of records that had waited years to speak. As they reached Rachel's car, Margaret opened the passenger door and handed Claire a copy of the inventory sheet. "Friday will not be easy," she said. "Daniel will attack the process, the timing, your motives, probably Evelyn's memory, and possibly the weather if he thinks it helps." Claire looked back at the red door. For the first time since the eviction, it did not look closed to her. It looked patient. "Let him," she said. "This time, I am bringing the house with me." Friday arrived with a sky the color of wet concrete and the kind of cold wind that made even the courthouse flags look tired. Claire stood on the sidewalk outside the county courthouse at 9:32 in the morning, holding Evelyn's notebook inside a plain canvas tote, because Margaret had warned her not to carry evidence like a movie prop unless she wanted the clerk to develop a headache. Rachel stood beside her with 2 coffees and the fierce expression of a woman prepared to glare a legal system into basic competence. The courthouse itself was an old brick building with white columns, narrow windows, and steps worn smooth by generations of people bringing their worst days to strangers in robes. Claire had been inside only once before, during the divorce, when Daniel's attorney had described her as financially dependent with the same tone a doctor might use for a rash. Back then, she had sat small and silent while men in expensive suits turned her marriage into percentages, schedules, and settlements. This time, Margaret walked beside her, leather case in hand, and Claire did not feel large exactly, but she felt present. That was new. Enough to matter. Inside, the hallway smelled of floor polish, paper, and burnt coffee from a vending machine that had clearly given up on happiness sometime during the Clinton administration. People moved in quiet clusters, whispering near benches, checking phones, clutching folders as if paper could keep their lives from falling apart. Claire saw Daniel before he saw her. He stood near courtroom 3 in a navy suit, speaking with Pierce Caldwell and another older attorney Claire recognized from the divorce, Martin Bell, a man with silver hair, rimless glasses, and the professional warmth of a locked filing cabinet. Vanessa was with them, dressed in black again, but without the confidence she had worn on the porch. Her eyes kept moving to Daniel, then away, like she was finally doing math she did not enjoy. Daniel turned when Rachel's shoes clicked on the tile. His face settled into a look of measured pity, so familiar, Claire nearly felt young again. "Claire," he said, stepping toward her before Margaret angled herself politely into the space between them. "Not in the hallway," Margaret said. Daniel ignored her because history had given him poor survival instincts. "This has gone too far. My mother was sick. You know that." Whatever she signed, she did not understand what she was doing. Claire looked at him, really looked at him, and noticed the faint shadows beneath his eyes, the tension at the corner of his mouth, the way his cuff was slightly crooked. Daniel Whitmore, the man who once corrected the way she folded dinner napkins before guests arrived, had missed a cufflink alignment. Financial desperation, apparently, was not kind to grooming standards. Evelyn understood more than you ever gave her credit for, Claire said. Her voice did not shake. That surprised both of them. Martin Bell stepped forward with a practiced smile. Mrs. Whitmore, this is an emotional matter, but emotions do not determine ownership. Margaret's smile was small and deeply unpleasant. How fortunate for us that recorded deeds do. Before Martin could answer, the courtroom door opened and the clerk called the case. Judge Eleanor Brooks presided from the bench with silver-gray hair, dark-framed glasses, and the expression of a woman who had heard every lie available in the English language and was waiting to see if anyone had invented a new one. The room was smaller than Claire expected, with wooden benches, fluorescent lights, and a seal above the bench that made everything feel both official and strangely fragile. Daniel's side sat at one table, Claire and Margaret at the other. Rachel took the bench directly behind Claire, close enough that Claire could feel her loyalty like heat at her back. Judge Brooks reviewed the file in silence for nearly a full minute. Paper moved beneath her hands. No one breathed comfortably. Finally, she looked up. We are here on an emergency motion to stay an eviction order and to determine whether the prior filing contained inaccurate or incomplete information regarding ownership of the Hawthorne Lane property. Her eyes moved to Daniel's table. Mr. Bell, your client obtained an order representing that the Whitmore family trust owned the property. Yet the county recorder's records appear to list Mrs. Claire and Whitmore as owner of record. I am interested in how that happened. Martin Bell rose smoothly. Your Honor, we believe the purported transfer was invalid due to questions surrounding Evelyn Whitmore's capacity and the lack of disclosure during the divorce proceedings. Judge Brooks glanced down at the file. Interesting. The deed appears to have been recorded 5 years before the divorce. Was your client unaware of his own mother's recorded transfer? Daniel's jaw tightened. Martin paused for half a beat too long. It was a tiny pause, barely a crack, but Claire felt the whole room lean toward it. Margaret stood. Your Honor, we have certified copies of the recorded deed, the notarization certificate, a physician's letter confirming Evelyn Whitmore's capacity 1 week before execution, mortgage and tax records, and handwritten notes establishing a consistent pattern of Claire Whitmore maintaining and financially supporting the property. She placed the folder on the table with calm precision. The prior eviction was not merely premature. It was based on a version of ownership that the public record does not support. Judge Brooks looked at Daniel, then at the documents, then back at Daniel. Mr. Whitmore, she said, when you asked this court to remove your former wife from that home, did you check the county record first? Daniel opened his mouth. For once, no perfect answer came out. Daniel looked down at the table as if the correct answer might be hiding somewhere between the polished wood grain and his attorney's legal pad. For years, Claire had watched him move through rooms with the unearned certainty of a man who believed hesitation was something other people did. He always had a sentence ready, a smile ready, a correction ready. But Judge Brooks had asked a question simple enough to fit on a grocery receipt, and Daniel Whitmore could not answer it without stepping into the truth. Martin Bell rose before Daniel could make things worse, which, in Claire's experience, was nearly always too late. Your Honor, my client relied on family understanding and prior estate documents indicating the property belonged to the Whitmore Family Trust. Judge Brooks removed her glasses and set them on the bench. The small gesture made the courtroom colder. Family understanding is not a substitute for a title search. Martin's smile thinned. Certainly, Your Honor. However, the transfer occurred during a period when Mrs. Evelyn Whitmore was undergoing significant medical treatment, and we believe further discovery is necessary to determine whether undue influence may have occurred. The words moved through the room like smoke. Undue influence. Claire felt Rachel stiffen behind her. There it was, the final insult dressed in courtroom language. Evelyn had not loved Claire, had not trusted Claire, had not made a decision with her own mind. Someone must have manipulated her, because in Daniel's world a woman giving another woman protection made less sense than a man hiding paperwork. Margaret stood slowly. She did not rush. She did not object with theatrics. She simply lifted the physician's letter from the folder and held it, as if she were presenting something fragile but unimpressed. Your Honor, Evelyn Whitmore's treating physician, Dr. Samuel Price, wrote 7 days before the deed was executed that Mrs. Whitmore was alert, oriented, coherent, and capable of making legal and financial decisions. The notary log confirms she appeared voluntarily. The deed was recorded by the county. The tax office mailed annual notices to Claire Whitmore at the Hawthorne Lane address. The mortgage servicer accepted payments from accounts bearing Claire's name for years. She placed each document on the table, one by one. The sound of paper touching wood became its own testimony. This is not a mystery created by illness. It is a public record ignored by the person who benefited from ignoring it. Daniel's hand tightened around his pen. Vanessa, sitting 2 rows behind him, stared at the side of his face. Claire could feel the shift in her without looking directly. Vanessa had arrived expecting to watch Daniel reclaim property. Instead, she was watching him become smaller under fluorescent lights. Judge Brooks turned to Pierce Caldwell, who looked as if he wished his parents had encouraged dentistry. "Mr. Caldwell, did your firm conduct a title search before filing the eviction petition?" Pierce stood, pale but careful. "Your Honor, our office relied on documents provided by Mr. Whitmore and a trust summary prepared several years ago. I was not personally involved in the initial filing. It was an elegant way of stepping away from a burning porch without admitting there was fire." Judge Brooks understood it perfectly. "That was not my question." Pierce swallowed. "No, Your Honor. To my knowledge, a current title search was not completed before the petition was filed." The courtroom went utterly still. Claire heard someone in the back row shift their coat. She heard Rachel exhale through her nose. She heard Daniel's pen click once, then again, the tiny sound of a man trying to control at least one object in the room. Judge Brooks looked at Daniel. "So this court was asked to remove a woman from a property based on incomplete and inaccurate ownership information." Martin began. "Your Honor, we would not characterize it as inaccurate." The judge's eyes moved to him. "The county record identifies Claire and Whitmore as owner. Your filing identified the Whitmore Family Trust as owner. Unless we have started using the word accurate as decoration, I am comfortable with my characterization." Margaret's mouth did not move, but Claire felt the satisfaction radiating from her side of the table like heat from a radiator. Judge Brooks reviewed the deed again, then the notary certificate, then Evelyn's letter. She did not read the whole letter aloud. She read only enough. "What I placed in your name, I placed there with a clear mind and a full heart." The words entered the courtroom softly, but Claire felt them land with more force than any accusation. Evelyn was gone, and still she had found a way to stand beside her. Daniel finally spoke. "My mother was emotional. Claire was caring for her. She depended on Claire." Judge Brooks looked up. "Dependence does not erase gratitude, Mr. Whitmore, nor does it invalidate a deed." Daniel's face tightened. "That house was my family's." Claire surprised herself by standing before Margaret could touch her sleeve. Her knees felt weak, but her voice did not. "It was your family's house," she said, looking at Daniel. "Then your mother made it my home. There is a difference." For 1 second, no one moved. Then Judge Brooks leaned back, her expression unreadable, and the silence that followed felt less like waiting and more like the moment before a locked door finally opens. Judge Brooks let the silence sit long enough for everyone in the room to understand that it belonged to her. Claire remained standing, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the table, surprised by the steadiness of her own body. She had spent so many years bracing for Daniel's reaction that stillness felt unfamiliar, almost suspicious, like a gift with fine print. Daniel looked at her as if she had spoken a language he once knew but had chosen to forget. His face was not angry now. Anger would have been easier. It was confusion, insult, and fear braided together beneath the disciplined surface of a man who had always assumed the world would rearrange itself before asking him to be honest. Judge Brooks put her glasses back on and turned to Margaret. "Ms. Hayes, please submit the certified deed, the recording confirmation, the physician's letter, the notary record, the mortgage summaries, and the inventory from the supervised access." Margaret did so with the quiet satisfaction of a woman placing bricks into a wall Daniel could no longer walk through. Martin Bell attempted one more rescue. "Your Honor, we still believe additional discovery is warranted before any permanent determination is made. The emotional circumstances surrounding Evelyn Whitmore's illness cannot be dismissed." Judge Brooks looked at him with an expression so flat it could have been used to level shelves. "Counsel, emotional circumstances do not erase recorded instruments. This court is not being asked today to resolve every possible civil claim your client may invent before lunch. It is being asked whether an eviction order was properly issued on the representation that the Whitmore Family Trust owned the property. The documents before me indicate it did not. Claire heard Rachel whisper something behind her that sounded like a prayer and a threat, trying to share one sentence. Vanessa sat with her hands folded in her lap, her wedding ring catching the courtroom light. She no longer looked at Claire with triumph. She barely looked at Daniel. That, Claire thought, might be the first honest thing Vanessa had done since the porch. Daniel leaned toward Martin and whispered sharply. Martin's mouth tightened. Pierce Caldwell stared at his notes, as if hoping they would open a tunnel under the table. Judge Brooks continued. The prior order to vacate is hereby stayed and vacated pending final title confirmation. Based on the certified county record, Claire and Whitmore is recognized by this court as the current owner of record of the Hawthorne Lane property unless and until a court of competent jurisdiction determines otherwise. The words did not explode. They did not come with music, applause, or the satisfying crack of a villain's mask falling to the floor. They arrived in the plain, measured tone of legal fact, and somehow that made them more powerful. Claire's knees softened. Margaret placed a steady hand near her elbow, not holding her up exactly, just reminding her that she did not have to fall simply because something good had happened. Judge Brooks was not finished. Mr. Whitmore, you and any occupants residing under your permission are ordered not to sell, encumber, remove fixtures from, damage, alter, or interfere with the property. You will arrange temporary removal of your personal belongings under a mutually agreed schedule supervised by counsel. Any further attempts to misrepresent ownership to this court will be viewed with extreme seriousness. Daniel stood. Your Honor, where am I supposed to go? The question slipped out before his attorney could stop it. It was almost funny, in the bleak little way life sometimes reveals its lack of imagination. 2 days earlier, he had watched Claire load boxes into the rain without asking where she would sleep. Now displacement had touched his expensive sleeve, and suddenly it was a philosophical crisis. Judge Brooks regarded him for a moment. Mr. Whitmore, that is not Mrs. Whitmore's legal burden. Claire looked down because if she looked at Rachel, they would both lose whatever courtroom dignity they had left, and Margaret would probably bill them for emotional misconduct. Martin gathered his papers, his movements clipped. Pierce avoided Daniel's eyes. Vanessa stood slowly, smoothing the front of her black coat. She looked toward Claire, and something like embarrassment crossed her face, not enough to redeem her, but enough to prove she was human. Daniel turned to Claire as the judge left the bench. You planned this, he said quietly. The old accusation, polished from years of use. If Claire suffered, she was weak. If she survived, she was calculating. If she won, she must have cheated. She picked up Evelyn's notebook and held it against her chest. No, Daniel, she said. Your mother planned for the possibility that one day you would be exactly who you are. For once, he had nothing to give back. Outside the courtroom, the hallway seemed brighter than before, though the same tired fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Rachel wrapped both arms around Claire, careful not to crush the tote bag of documents between them. Margaret stood nearby, already checking her phone, because apparently justice could not enjoy a full minute before paperwork started multiplying like mold. Claire looked through the courthouse windows at the gray morning beyond them. The rain had stopped. Somewhere across town, a red door waited, not as a wound anymore, but as a witness. Claire did not go back to Hawthorne Lane that day. Margaret advised waiting until Daniel and Vanessa had scheduled their supervised removal of personal belongings, and for once, Claire did not argue with caution. There was a time when she would have mistaken restraint for weakness, because Daniel had trained everyone around him to believe the loudest person in the room owned the truth. Now she understood that some victories needed silence afterward, not celebration, not spectacle, just enough quiet for the soul to catch up with the facts. She spent the weekend at Rachel's townhouse, sleeping more than she expected and waking each morning with the confused tenderness of someone who had survived a storm but still listened for thunder. On Monday afternoon, Margaret called to say Daniel had removed his things from the house under supervision. Vanessa had not come with him. That detail arrived without explanation, and Claire did not ask for one. Other people's marriages, she had learned, often looked glamorous from the curb and very tired in the hallway. By Tuesday, Claire stood once again before the red door, this time with the key in her own hand and no deputy beside her. The air was cold but clear. Sunlight lay across the porch in pale strips, and the maple tree near the driveway had dropped most of its leaves, leaving the branches bare and honest against the sky. Rachel waited by the car, giving Claire space without abandoning her, which was the kind of friendship that should probably be taught in schools instead of whatever tragic nonsense people learn from inspirational posters. Claire slid the key into the lock. It turned easily. The door opened with the same soft sigh it always had, and the house greeted her not like a prize, but like a witness. Inside, everything was quieter than she remembered. Daniel's sharp furniture was gone. Vanessa's fabric swatches were gone. The silver tray had disappeared. From Evelyn's desk, what remained was dust, sunlight, a few dents in the rug, and the faint smell of cedar from the study. Claire walked from room to room slowly, touching nothing at first. The house did not feel like home anymore, not fully. Too much had happened. Too many versions of herself had been left in corners. The young wife arranging flowers before Daniel's clients arrived. The tired caregiver sleeping in a chair near Evelyn's bed. The divorced woman pretending not to flinch when neighbors looked at her with pity. The evicted woman carrying boxes through rain while the man who once promised forever checked his phone. She could not live among all those ghosts forever. In the study, she opened Evelyn's notebook again and sat at the desk where the truth had waited. The final pages were not legal notes. They were ordinary observations, grocery lists, book titles, reminders to call Claire, a recipe for apple cake with too much cinnamon, because Evelyn believed restraint had no place in dessert. Claire smiled at that, and the smile broke something loose in her chest. Not grief exactly. Something gentler. Permission. 2 weeks later, after the final title confirmation was entered and Daniel withdrew his challenge with all the dignity of a man retreating from a room he had set on fire by accident, Claire made her decision. She would not keep the house. Rachel thought she might regret selling it. Margaret said property was property and peace was priceless, which was probably the closest Margaret Hayes ever came to poetry. Claire hired a realtor, a kind woman named Denise who understood not to call it a fresh start too many times. Before the listing went live, Claire painted the red door herself. The same deep cranberry shade. The same careful strokes. This time, no one complained from the driveway. No one told her it was dramatic. When the house sold 3 months later to a young couple with a baby and a golden retriever who immediately tried to eat one of Denise's business cards, Claire felt no jealousy. She felt relief. At closing, after the signatures were complete and the funds transferred, she set aside enough to buy a small condo with tall windows and a balcony full of morning light. Then she used a portion of the proceeds to create the Evelyn Whitmore Legal Fund through a local nonprofit, offering emergency consultations for women facing housing disputes after divorce or family breakdown. The first check she wrote was not enormous by the standards of men like Daniel, but it was real, and it carried Evelyn's name into rooms where frightened women sat with folders in their laps, wondering whether anyone would believe them. 6 months later, Claire drove past Hawthorne Lane on her way to Rachel's birthday dinner, and hands that trembled whenever she mentioned her late husband's brother. He had told her the house was not really hers. He had told her the deed was complicated. He had told her she should sign a few forms before the family had to make things unpleasant. Claire recognized the language immediately. Not the exact words, maybe, but the shape of them. Men like that rarely invented anything. They inherited cruelty the way other people inherited silverware. Across the table, a young attorney reviewed Marjorie's documents while Claire sat beside her, not as a lawyer, not as a savior, but as proof that humiliation was not the end of the story. Marjorie kept apologizing for the mess. Claire gently pushed the papers back toward her and said, "This is not a mess. This is evidence." The woman looked at her then, really looked, and Claire saw the moment the sentence landed. Evidence. Not clutter. Not shame. Not proof that she had failed to understand her own life. Evidence. That became the quiet heartbeat of the fund. Some women came with folders. Some came with screenshots printed at the library. Some came with court notices folded so many times the creases looked like scars. They were young and old, wealthy and broke, polished and exhausted. A nurse whose husband had refinanced their home without explaining the terms. A mother of 3 whose in-laws claimed the down payment had been a loan. A widow whose stepson changed the locks while she was staying with her sister after surgery. Claire listened to them all. She learned that losing a home was rarely just about walls and a roof. It was about being told that your memory did not count, your labor did not count, your name did not count unless it was useful on a bill. The fund did not win every case. Life was not that generous, and the legal system was not a fairy godmother with better stationery. But it won enough. It delayed evictions. It forced disclosures. It found deeds, receipts, signatures, bank transfers, tax records, and occasionally one spectacularly arrogant email that made an attorney smile like a shark discovering brunch. Each small victory felt like adding one more light to a dark hallway. Claire kept Evelyn's notebook in a locked drawer of her condo desk, not because she needed to hide it anymore, but because some things deserved a place of honor that was also practical. On the first anniversary of the hearing, Rachel brought over takeout from the Thai place Claire loved and a grocery store cake with red frosting around the edge. Margaret came too, claiming she had only stopped by for 5 minutes, and then staying for 2 hours because even lawyers, despite years of professional resistance, sometimes turned out to be people. They ate on Claire's balcony while the city lights blinked on below them. Rachel raised a plastic fork like a champagne glass and toasted to paperwork, red doors, and men learning consequences at an age when it is frankly embarrassing. Margaret added, to certified copies. Claire laughed until her eyes watered. Later, after they left, she stood alone on the balcony with a cup of tea cooling in her hands. Her condo was not large. It did not have a sweeping staircase or a formal dining room or a red door visible from the street. It had a balcony, a sturdy lock, shelves full of books, and a kitchen window that filled with gold light every morning. It had silence that did not feel like punishment. It had bills in her name, keys in her bowl, and no one walking through the rooms measuring her worth by how useful she could be. Her phone buzzed once on the counter. For a moment, some old part of her body expected Daniel. It was not him. She had not heard from him in months, except through the faint civic gossip that his company had been sold. Vanessa had moved to Boston, and Daniel was renting a luxury apartment he described as temporary with the optimism of a man still negotiating with reality. The message was from Marjorie Fields. A photograph appeared on Claire's screen. Marjorie standing in front of a small white house with blue shutters, holding up a key and smiling like someone had handed her back the sky. Claire pressed a hand to her mouth. Outside, the evening air smelled faintly of rain, though the sky was clear. She thought of Evelyn, of the red door, of the woman she had been when Daniel knocked her life apart with paperwork and a polished lie. Then she thought of all the doors that would open because one woman, dying but clear-eyed, had understood that love sometimes needed ink, witnesses, and a county stamp. Claire set the phone down and looked out at the city. She had once believed justice meant getting back what was taken. Now she knew better. Sometimes justice was what you built afterward, with steady hands, in your own name, so the next woman did not have to stand alone in the ring.